Today we will be discussing Chapter 7, which deals with constructed response tests, specifically essay tests, how to build and score them. Here's some basic information you need to know about essay items before we begin. Essay items are the most commonly used forms of constructed response assessments. Also, when writing an essay item, a writing sample is one form that you may use. Writing samples help teachers measure students' composition skills, for instance, during a free write or on a familiar topic. Essay items are more difficult to write than are generally thought. The difficulty arises when teachers ignore the perspectives of their students and do not follow clear guidelines. This may lead to inconsistent results during scoring. What is an essay item? An essay item is one that requires a coherent and informative response to a question. It allows or assesses the test taker to organize information and express his or her ideas in writing. These types of items tap in to higher order or higher level complex skills, such as interpreting, reasoning, analyzing, evaluating, and making conclusions. These types of items can be restricted or extended in format. As the names suggest, restricted essay items restrict or limit the amount of information to be provided on a particular topic or question. In contrast, the extended essay item allows for a more in-depth analysis or response to the question. Here are some of the uses and benefits of essay items. Essay items are used to gauge students' abilities to 1. Synthesize information, 2. Evaluate concepts, and 3. Compose comprehensive responses. The essay item is great for assessing complex learning outcomes. Now, let us examine the guidelines for creating essay items. The first guideline is to communicate your desired extensiveness of students' responses. You may do this by using a restricted response item in which you limit the form and content of students' responses. For instance, you may specify the number of points students ought to discuss as well as the maximum length of the response. In contrast, teachers may employ an extended response item which allows students far more latitude in responding. Secondly, explicitly describe students' tasks. The most important part of an essay item is the description of the assessment task. Simply, a poorly described assessment task yields off-target responses, whereas a well-described task yields targeted responses. The third guideline is to indicate appropriate time and value per item. If students are unaware of which items count most, they may spend insufficient time on valuable items and more time on least valuable items. The fourth guideline is not to include optional items. When students select different items from a menu of possible items, they are actually responding to a different examination. This makes it impossible for you to judge their performance on a common scale, and it further undermines the validity of the examination and reduces score-based reliability. The final guideline is to preview students' responses, and this can be done either mentally or written. Mental and/or written previewing of likely student responses can help you detect flaws while there is still time for repair. Here are two sample items to be considered for an 8th grade English class. The first is presented in a restricted essay format, which helps limit and focus the responses of students. This type of item stipulates extensiveness, explicitly states tasks, and allows the teacher to preview students' responses. In contrast, item 2 is extended in format and does not exemplify a structured item. This makes students' tasks vague and teachers' previewing difficult. Let us now examine the guidelines for scoring responses to essay items. Score responses holistically and/or analytically. A holistic scoring strategy focuses on the essay's response as a whole. That is, the teacher may supply an overall grade based on the general impression of the response. In contrast, an analytic scoring scheme is more rigid in that it is a specific point allocation approach. Secondly, prepare a tentative scoring key in advance. If you wait until you begin scoring to decide on point allocation, you may be unduly influenced by the responses of the first few students whose papers you graded. Thirdly, decide on the level of emphasis to be placed on mechanics prior to scoring. If mechanics aren't all that important to you, based on the purpose and context of the items, you must not allow your students' writing mechanics to subconsciously influence the way you score their responses. Fourthly, score all responses to one item before moving to the next item to avoid scoring biases based on a student's response to an earlier item. And finally, evaluate responses anonymously as far as possible to avoid personal biases and assumptions. To recap, when creating an essay item, you should consider the item's extensiveness, explicit tasks, time and value per item, forfeiting optional items, and previewing students' responses. When scoring responses to essay items, score holistically and/or analytically, prepare a tentative scoring key, decide on the level of emphasis to be placed on mechanics, score all responses to one item before moving to the next, and score anonymously as far as possible. Thank you.